now to some news that is just coming in. The Israeli military says it completed a broad strike on the strategic defense system of the Iranian regime. The Iranian foreign minister says we are attacking military bases in the region as an act of self-defense. Let's cross now to London and bring in Jasmin El Gamal, a political analyst and former Pentagon Middle East advisor. Thank you so much for joining us today in the program. So we've just been speaking to our correspondent in Washington, talking a bit about Donald Trump and his actions. So he's been acting unilaterally since he returned to office in the U.S. And we saw, him go into Venezuela and detain and arrest Nicolas Maduro. Now, in the midst of negotiations, he's bombed Iran. He seems to be upending diplomacy here and getting away with it. So what do you think the impact of his actions have been?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your program. I think, Donald Trump has never shied away from unilateral action, whether it's domestically or internationally. So this certainly it's not a surprise that he's acting unilaterally. I don't think anyone expected Donald Trump to go to the UN and seek approval or have discussions or consultations with allies, from the region about this strike, or even go to Congress to ask for permission. So this was a unilateral strike, and we have no idea what will unfold from here on out over the next few days. There's huge potential for escalation, as you were just discussing earlier. As of now, Iran has hit U.S. facilities in 5 out of the 6 GCC countries. The GCC countries are now coordinating together and talking with each other about how they want to move forward vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis the U.S., whether they want to relax some of the restrictions that surround U.S. Use of their territories to strike at Iran. Obviously, the U.S. has a huge military presence right now in the region, the largest since the Iraq War. So all of the factors for a broader conflict are there in the region. And one really wonders what would be the thing that would stop this from escalating if all of the warnings from the regional countries, from the Omanis as the main mediators, were not enough to get Donald Trump to refrain from striking until negotiations were completely exhausted. I don't know what would.
Now, I was also discussing the negotiations that had finished Thursday, and then, the strikes coming right after that. And the Israeli government had said these were in the works for months. So were the negotiations meant to fail? Were they in good faith or not, do you believe?
Well, that's a really good question. This is the second time now, of course, last year with the 12-day war, in the run-up to the 12-day war, the U.S. and Iran were also in negotiations, and the Iranians were presenting proposals to the U.S. team, and then they were struck. So you're absolutely right to ask that question. I think the answer, I don't know if we will have the answer to that question anytime soon. Certainly in terms of intentions, I don't know what's in Donald Trump's head, and I don't know how much he had been swayed by the Israelis, by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has always wanted regime change for decades in Iran, ever since I was working at the Pentagon back in 2008. And so I don't know that President Trump really came into office this term thinking that he was going to make sure that regime change in Iran happened, or whether he was slowly convinced, both by hawks within the U.S. administration, the executive branch and the legislative branch, or whether he always thought he would do this. We know that when his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, first entered into negotiations this time around, and last time as well, that that the Americans were initially willing to talk about lower levels of enrichment with the Iranians that didn't go up to the level required for making a nuclear weapon. And then, based on pressure and discussions with the Israelis, the American position went to the maximalist 0% enrichment. And that made negotiations a lot more difficult.
Now, Jasmin, you mentioned their regime change. That's something that we've been talking a lot today on the program. Last month were the anti-government protests, some of the largest Iran has seen. They were brutally repressed, but that's got to be a calculation here that the Iranian people do want a different form of government. Do you think this is the closest they can come to achieve that, or is this going to turn into another Iraq where what we think is going to happen turns out to be something completely different?
Right. Well, I certainly can't speak for the Iranian people, and we have seen them out protestings in the tens and tens of thousands, and protesting over years. Again, when I was at the Pentagon 2009, the Green Revolution, you've had Women, Life, Freedom, and then you've had the protests this year. So it is absolutely safe to say that the Iranian people have made it very clear that they want a different kind of leadership, one that is not so oppressive, and one that does not spend most of its resources supporting proxies and getting into indirect conflicts across the region. That said, we're talking here about regime change. We're talking about violations of international law. We're talking about impunity for certain actors in the world, for certain countries to go out and physically change the governments of other countries without any kind of oversight or accountability, including to their own taxpayers, in the case of the US, for example. And so, as you mentioned with Iraq, I mean, go ask the Iraqi people how they felt about that regime change operation and how much they had to suffer in the years after that. So there is a huge list of options when we talk about changing regime behavior that does not go all the way to changing the actual regime itself, with all of the risks that come with that. And just very quickly, lastly, I'll say that the Omani foreign minister was on US media yesterday on Face the Nation saying that he believed, and this is very rare for the Omanis to do this and to do a public media appearance like this. He said he believed that the Iranians had made significant concessions, that they were prepared to commit to not having a nuclear weapon, that they had agreed to go to zero stockpiling, which is necessary to achieve a nuclear weapon. And that interview aired less than 24 hours before the US and Israeli strikes.
Now, some news just coming in. Jasmin, the Iranian foreign minister, has said in a message to Trump about regime change in Iran that this is mission impossible. However, he also said that Iran was willing to talk. So do we see an off-ramp here, possibly?
Well, again, like I said, the Iranians were already talking. The Iranians and the US were already talking. They just weren't talking to the satisfaction, I suppose, of the Israelis and of the Trump administration, in the sense of agreeing to zero enrichment. There were also some talks about how reluctant the Iranians were to talk about their ballistic missile program and support for proxies. And so there was frustration on the US side, and certainly with pressure from Prime Minister Netanyahu about slow progress on the negotiating track. That said, the Iranians know that they are no match militarily in the long term for a combined U.S.-Israeli continued offensive. And so it does not surprise me that they want to come back to the table. The question is, will they now come back to the table with even more concessions that than they've made before, such as agreeing to zero enrichment and opening up the talks to cover ballistic missiles? Or is that just going to be another way of basically negotiating themselves out of existence as opposed to being bombed out of existence. It's a tough spot for the Iranian regime to be in right now.
Yasmin, stay with us. I want to bring in